And finally, for this introduction, we're going to discuss mean. What is mean and why is it a measure of central tendency? So, in the United States, it is what most of us refer to as the average. There's actually more than one way to compute mean, but the way that we're talking about is the arithmetic mean. Usually we don't have this qualifier at the beginning. Most of us, when we hear mean, are thinking about the arithmetic mean and just say mean. Okay, so what is it? Since in the US, it's what we generally refer to in everyday language as the average. It's the total of scores over the number of scores. And as a quick side note, if you've gathered information from all individuals you're trying to describe, then we use the lowercase Greek mu, which is their equivalent for M. Since a lot of times the scores will be called the X's, then we have X with a bar over it. That's just read as X bar. That's if you've only gathered information from a sample. The data does not need to be in order to compute it. Although if you like, I could rearrange, swap the 2 and the 7 here. Our total, 2, 4, 8, 15. Now, since I don't know where this information came from, I just made up these numbers, really. I'm not going to use mu or X bar just yet. We have 5 scores, and so our mean is 3. Now, if you think about what I just said in the previous video about median, now that these are in order and there are 5 scores, you can tell that the median is 2, so that you're roughly splitting up the lower and upper 50% of the data. What's making mean a measure of central tendency? What's special about 3? We'll see that in just a moment. Now, just to make this nicer to look at, I took the scores that we were dealing with. Again, they do not have to be in order. I've typed them into Excel. We found that 3 is the mean. Take a look. If I subtract 3 from each of those scores, some of them are lower than the mean, and so subtracting the larger mean will give us a negative, whereas the scores that were higher than the mean subtract a larger number minus a smaller number will give us a positive. And if you look at this new column here, besides the fact that some are negative and some are positive, well, the total, and we were talking about adding up the scores and then dividing by how many scores there were. Well, our total here is 5. And our total here is -5. The total, or the sum of the scores minus means. You do score minus mean for each score, and then total them up, you get 0. And by the way, if you went further and divided by the number of scores, which in this case was 5, you would still have 0. So one way of viewing why mean is a measure of central tendency is that when we do score minus mean for each score, we've balanced them out, getting that 0. However, there's another way of thinking about what mean is doing, why it's a measure of central tendency. If you think about it, that last step was division. When we first learn about division as elementary students, we're told to think about, we've got this total and we know how many groups we have. We want to find out how many objects we can give to each group. Or you have this total and you know how many objects you are going to put per group. So how many groups can you have? And I want to illustrate this. It is going to refer back to some ideas from elementary school, but this is not to be condescending. It's actually to build on a very powerful idea. A lot of the ideas set up in elementary school are very powerful ideas that we can build on later. So when we have, say, 5 groups with a different number of objects from what we had back here, 1, 1, 2, 4, and 7, what's going on when we compute the mean is the following. I still have the same total so far, and I still have the same number of groups. At every stage of the game, I didn't take out any of those squares nor put any more in, but I had the same total of 15 and 5 groups. That mean of 3 can be viewed as leveling out. So we see previously, when we look at score minus mean, that we have the mean balancing out the scores with a sum of 0 for score minus mean. Once we've done that to all scores and then add that all up. And now we see leveling out. So between those two things, that's why we can think of mean as a measure of center as well.